Welcome back. You're watching the second edition of the India Development Debate right here on ET Now. I'm Supriya Shrinate, and it is bittersweet for India as far as the nation's brand value is concerned. Our country has slipped one position to the 9th slot this year in Brand Finance's annual list of the world's most valued nations. What is more worrying is the fact that this is the third straight year of decline in the nation brand rankings since 2016. Looking from the positive side though, our valuation grew 5% to $2159 billion in 2018 compared to the $2046 billion last year. India continues to remain in the elite club of the top 10 most valued nations in the world, a reflection of our gains in the overall image and economic progress. Also, India is the only entry from the BRICS nation, and we are even ahead of some of the marquee nations like Singapore, Australia and also Switzerland. As the champions of the Rise with India theme, we are discussing today the hits and the misses of Brand India on a special edition of the India Development Debate. And I've got a stellar panel that understands brands and all of that and a lot more as far as India is concerned. Joining me right here, Harish Bijur, CEO of Harish Bijur Consults Inc. joins us. Shumanta Chattopadhyay, Chairman and CCO, Soho Square Advertising, Ogilvy Group joins us, and Sadanand Dume, Resident Fellow, American Enterprise Institute joins us. Thank you each one of you for being with us. And Sadanand, let me start off with you. You're on the show after a while, so good to have you back, and happy Dussehra, everyone. India ranks 9th in a list of 50 most valuable nation brands across the world, according to a report from Brand Finance. Now, is this a ratification of sorts, considering this is coming at a time when our macros and growth pictures actually looking weak and vulnerable?
Very happy Dussehra to you too. Great to be back on your show. You know, I wouldn't really, read too much into this, story of gentle decline. I mean, if you look at these numbers, basically if you look at the top 10, it's essentially the G7 plus China, India and South Korea. And much of the weightage, as far as I can tell, is simply determined by the size of a country's economy. So obviously a country like India, which has a very large economy, is going to find itself, somewhere in the top 10. So I guess that's my, that's the first and most important point. Secondly, is I don't think we should, when you look at these sort of small changes here and there, it's always tempting to kind of fit that to whatever our kind of pre-existing narrative is in our mind. And I'm glad we don't have any politicians on tonight's show, but normally I imagine you'd have the Congress spokesperson screaming that, oh my God, look, India is declining, and you'd have the BJP spokesperson saying that no, it's not such a big deal. My own view is that these kinds of surveys are not exactly nuclear physics. This is not the most exact sort of thing without taking anything away from their efforts. And so we take it with a grain of salt and we look at it to just get a broad sense of, where India is and how it stacks up compared to other countries.
Okay, hold that thought right now. And I think from a large nation point of view, it's important that we are there. Should we be in the first 5 and all of that, I'll cover a little later in the show. But Harish Bijur, if I look at the last 3 years, India has slipped for the second year in a row, from 7th position in 2016 to 8th in 2017 to 9th in 2018. What do you think explains that slide?
When I look at this slide, I'm not giving too much of credence to this slide, firstly. I'm really saying that, there are two sets of data points out here. One is a subjective one and the other is a reasonably objective one. The reasonably objective set of data points that I'm talking about is the GDP growth or the GDP numbers of the nation. If you really look at it, some years ago, we displaced France. We were in number 7, and then we displaced UK just about recently. We are now in the number 5 position. And I think growing from 7 to 6 to 5, and we might be nudging at Germany, which has a $4 trillion GDP at this point of time, and we are somewhere around 2.8. So that seems to be going in the right direction. And subjective studies will always reveal, different parts of the story. But, and there's a big but here. Extremely important for us to appreciate that when you talk growth and when you talk an ecosystem of growth, it really is not only the economy. It is much more than the economy. And I think it is the ecology, it is the ecological system that into which we operate at this point of time. It's all about saying, are you a sunrise nation or are you a sunset nation? If I look at all the nations on this chart, you're really talking sunrise nations. And if I look at the GDP growth that's occurring, I think we are really talking about nudging very close to US on top, and then China, and then us. We are a distant third to China in the future, but that's going to be the status quo.
Okay. I want to go back to Shrimanto, and the differentiation has been made between the objective and the subjective factors, but should this be attributed more to hard or to soft factors, considering the brand strength index takes into account multiple factors, whether it's government policy to trade rules to quality of life to education?
So I would, yeah, so clearly it's a combination of hard and soft issues. I think that what I would look at, in fact, is a different example. I would look at South Korea, which is a country which has dramatically come up the index. And if we look at a couple of reasons for it, is that number one, it has hosted events like it hosted the Olympics 30 years ago, which sort of really helped project it in the to the entire world. And now it's headed to host the Winter Olympics, which is also going to take it to another level. Also, I think that one thing that India is lacking is like a Samsung. It represents that country. I mean, of course, it's a fabulous brand, and it represents this very successful big company that has spread all over the world. But I just think that there is also a lot of soft stuff which is associated with a big brand which the world consumes. I mean, I've got a Samsung phone. So if it comes from your country, that helps. Or if you look at national carriers, a Singapore, which is a tiny country, it has a Singapore Airlines, which helps literally carry its story, its narrative throughout the world. You have the channels like the BBC, which sort of represent the UK story or the UK worldview to the world. So I think that these are a few of the, I guess you would call them softer areas where India is lacking. And of course, the things which you mentioned, I mean, the quality of life, everybody, foreigners who come into this country talk about the terrible pollution, the terrible conditions in some of our biggest cities, the traffic jams, and all of that. I think the gender inequality, the violence against women, so all of these I think contribute to a lower score.
Harish, the index takes into account indicators like trade rules, government policy, quality of life, security, judicial system, corruption, use of technology, talent training, taxation, investor protection, and I can go on. Many believe in the last 1 year, there is a little bit of a vulnerability as far as a macro picture is concerned. Safety of our women has been in the highlight. Many cases of rape have taken the cognizance world over. Even as our judiciary has given some really path-breaking judgment. So I am presuming that will be positive. How is this mixed picture going to impact our rankings going ahead, you think?
Priya, this mixed picture is a reality of a nation which is a sunrise nation. Because the sunrise nation is actually rocked by politics and noisy politics. And India, incidentally, today is a nation of very, very noisy politics. And the noisy politics is not only restricted within the political boundaries of the country, but tends to spill over into every nation out there, and rightly so. So there are two images. One is an extrinsic brand image of India, which is, what the rest of the world thinks of India. And then there's an intrinsic brand image of India, which is what Indians think of India. So I suspect Indians think much better of India than what outsiders think of India. And I think that is an issue that needs correction, because there are certain issues, and the key issues are neutrality. How neutral is the nation? The second is stable politics. How does the politics of the nation look? Does it look stable? Does it look like something that's going to continue into the future? Democracy. How is the democratic value being really played out in the country? And these are important because whenever you talk China and when you talk the rest of the world, there's always this sense of saying, hey, China is not a democracy. The US is. So a 20 trillion US dollar economy, which is the United States of America, is far, far away, much bigger than 20 trillion as opposed to the 13 trillion of China. So China, even when China gets to be 20 trillion, I think there's going to be a discounting factor because of the type of politics within the country. So I think all these tend to hamper growth. But I'm getting back to my original point of saying a sunrise nation like India is going to have noisy politics, and this noisy politics is likely to be negative from the extrinsic image point of view, what the world thinks of India.
Yeah, but do we want to have it any other way? And the answer to that is a resounding no. This noisy politics is what keeps a thriving democracy alive. But let me take this across to Sadanand. And Sadanand, the US has retained the top spot. The report says in the longer run, negative perceptions about brand Trump have turned out to have little impact on the nation's brand. Rather, the new free market policies have resonated with business leaders, and the economy is growing, driving an improvement in America's brand. Now, similarly, perceptions of Brexit go against the economic reality. Does this indicate that socio-politic perceptions have no repercussions as far as the economy or other perceptions are concerned?
I'm not sure if they have no repercussions at all. I mean, it shouldn't be surprising to anyone that the US is number one. It's by far the world's largest economy. It has by far the most soft power in the world. It's the home to iconic brands such as Apple and Coca-Cola and Microsoft and you name it. It's a very open society. It's a magnet for talent across the world. So, it doesn't surprise me at all that the US is going to be number one in this kind of survey. And also coming back to the sort of original point, you have to see that the top 10 over there, it's really weighted towards very large economies. So if you were to kind of look at this in more kind of per capita terms, and I think there's another element in this, there's another section in the report which looks at the strongest brands, that is kind of interesting in another way. And you have countries that like Singapore that are small but pack a lot of punch. But coming back to India, I think there's nothing to really self-flagellate on. If you again look at that top 10, India has by far the lowest per capita income there, but it's still there as a top 10 country. And it's there because, partly because it has a very large economy, because of the sheer number of people, but also because it is democratic, it is open, it is a country that has been growing rapidly, and it carries a certain weight because of all those reasons. So, there may be fluctuation here and there, it goes from 6 to 9 and maybe it comes back to 7. But, as long as India remains in the top 10, I think that's the big picture that people ought to focus on.
No, I understand. It should be in the top 10, and that's the big picture one must focus on. But Sumanta, India may have slipped 2 ranks, yes, and that's what detractors will say. And I agree with the Sadanand. This would have been a very different sort of a high decibel debate had we got the politicians. We consciously chose not to get them and instead discuss it with folks like yourselves. Because if you look at comparable economies, I mean, Brazil at number 17, Russia at number 18, South Africa at 49, Mexico at 14, India ranks number 9. Is perhaps the only developing economy on the list with US, China, the European countries. Isn't that something, like Sadanand was pointing out there, our per capita may be low, but we're still in the top 10. Isn't that something also to celebrate, that from a peer comparison, we're much better off?
Absolutely. I think that, whenever you meet people from outside, as I was saying earlier, they talk about the fact that there may have been hiccups in India, such as demonetization, but the overall story is a strong one, and that story, the growth story is strong, the cultural story is strong, and that's something that I'm sure has gone into it, because if you look at the Incredible India campaign, which is a sort of advertising campaign for brand India, especially the tourism and the cultural side, that is something that has had a tremendously positive impact on the image of India, and all our millions of cultural festivals, all the many different aspects of our culture, all of it contribute to making this a vibrant country, a vibrant market, and that is something which is helping put us in the top 10, and is going to continue to do so. And it is, so therefore, I think all the cultural celebrations that we have contributed to getting us in this top 10, and that's something to celebrate for sure.
Fair point. Okay, Sadanand, I'm going to ask you a bit of a, we're still doing this debate, but I still want to understand, do brand rankings like these have any impact on the ground in terms of perception of an incumbent government, particularly in an election year? Because the reality is that in India, a lot of perception about the country and brand India is right now focused around the Prime Minister himself. He's a great brand ambassador. He's got great brand recall. But does this really make difference on the ground in terms of perception? Sadanand.
No, a quick two-part answer. The first part is no. I don't think that your average man on the street cares at all. And the second part is that there are all kinds of rankings. Not all of them carry the same amount of weight. I would say, for instance, the ease of doing business rankings, it kind of feeds more directly into the larger kind of story about how well the government has handled the economy. So maybe on the margins over there, that would matter. I don't think this particular survey carries that kind of weight. So the short answer is no.
Okay, the short answer is no, but Harish, seemingly this index doesn't really take parameters like health and education too seriously, more focused on finance and all of that. Are we losing sight of social inclusive development and focusing more just on the economy? And as a developing country, can we afford to do that?
Yeah, I think that is a problem with most surveys, most reports, which keep coming up. Every other month you have something coming up. There's no one holistic survey. There's no one survey which really looks at it 360 degrees. Even if it does, it gives a weightage which is very, very heavy to the economy and maybe not so much to anything else. For instance, sustainability. How sustainable is this economic growth that these guys are all talking about? What is real growth? And what happens when a nation actually achieves something very significant? What happens when, let's say, India achieves Sikkim as a complete 100% organic state all of a sudden from somewhere? Is that anecdotal, or is it something very, very solid for the future? I just want to come back to one point and say that, hey, listen, guys, as far as brand is concerned, it has three items to it. One is there's a brand solid, there's a brand liquid, and there's a brand gas. I'm really very, very importantly, I really value brand solids. So grow slow, grow hard, grow without really tom-tomming it all about, grow without brand gas, grow with brand solids. And I think the future is really going to be solid. And if you really look at India and the kind of growth we are talking about, I think we are going to get there. And when you talk about brands, people keep asking me, hey guys, which is that one global brand that you guys have built, which you can talk about? I, of course, talk about the soft brands of Mahatma Gandhi. I talk of yoga. I talk of TM. But in addition, I also talk about the fact that we have Tata Consultancy Services out of here. We have Infosys. We have Wipro. We have n number of brands which we have created. But the problem is these are B2B brands. They're business-to-business brands. They're not business-to-consumer brands in a real sense, like the Apples of the world are. And I think that is a rectification point which we need to get to.
No, I think that's a very important point that you're making, that the business to consumer brand is really where the brand recall builds up. And Sadanand was right in pointing out there that I'm not surprised by US is #1. It is home to some of the most iconic brands, whether it's Apple, Google, Microsoft, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, you name it, and the brands are all housed in the US. So I think on that point, you were completely right there. But Sumanta, if I may come to you for another question, and really taking this debate forward in many ways, how does this brand ranking at #9, being in the top 10 in the world, help us in being more globally competitive? How does it support small startups, coming up brands? Does it help us attract more foreign investment? Because perception is what precedes investments, largely. So is this a precursor to us being, at least held high?
Yes, absolutely, because I think that there has been some negative news also which keeps coming out, which keeps going out from India to the world, whether it's, some of the things like demonetization, which was mentioned earlier, or about the status of women, India being the rape capital, so on and so forth. So I think that when you have a ranking like this, it reassures investors, it reassures visitors, and I think that, like you said, and that's what precedes the investment, that's what precedes the tourism, which also brings in money. So I think that it is while this is just one of many surveys, and I suspect that this is going to this is very successfully brought a lot of positive publicity to brand finance, which has created it. But similarly, I think the people in the top 10 in the survey are also going to benefit from it. And India being one of the only developing countries in the top 10, the only one that it's going to help us the most, is what I believe.
Okay, Sadan, let's take this forward and really talk about the risks that we run, that India faces in slipping out of the top 10. Obviously, we would want to be in the top 5 club, but what are the risks that we run in terms of slipping out of the top 10? Concerns have been raised that need to be addressed on the policy and other front. What would some of your pointers be?
So first of all, I'll disagree with the person who went before me. I don't think that the world is spending a lot of time focusing on this particular survey and looking at who is at number 9 and who's at number 6. In all honesty, I hadn't heard of this survey until 5 minutes before we came on air. And so we have to sort of recognize that not all of, these rankings do send signals to investors, right? So the ease of doing business ranking does. The rankings of sort of, where you are in terms of FDI inflows, that's another one that does. The Human Development Index is, of course, a very important ranking, though it may not be directly linked to investment flows. But there's a kind of hierarchy, right? Some of these things are better known than others. So that's my point. That's my first point. And related to that, I think that the India story has taken a beating, and it's taken a beating for a couple of reasons. But the most important one is that there's a sense that the reform agenda, which many of us were very optimistic about at one point, has flagged because the government has come under political pressure. So what would be much more important if the idea is to improve India's brand writ large, as opposed to where it goes, where it is in some survey, I think that story, India does have the capacity to change that story, but the capacity really is rooted in government action. So if we see a bold set of reform moves, that's the sort of thing that ends up getting reported in the Wall Street Journal, in the Financial Times. That's the sort of thing that CEOs in corporate boardrooms pay attention to. That's the kind of thing that engenders a buzz around a country and then kind of changes its image. I think we spend a little bit too much time looking, just at tables, and not enough time at looking at the substance that makes these kinds of rankings possible.
Oh yeah, absolutely, no denying that. But I've got the last 2 minutes on the show, I've been told, and let me go to the two brand gurus, so to say. Harish Bijuru, let's begin with you. What would our best sales pitch to the world be?
Well, the best sales pitch, as far as I see, in a rather hollow world, which does believe in a lot of propaganda, and the financial sector, the economic sector, is not without its own bit of brand gas, is for India to say that I'm a much more solid nation than anyone else. For India to say that I have the world's second largest population. And for India to say that when you talk per capita income in India, it means a lot. It means as diverse a number as something that spans across 1.3 billion plus people. So it's about India standing up and saying, I'm much more solid. I'm a large nation. I am a democracy. And I am running towards economic equality. I'm running to eradicate poverty. And I'm running to actually create a growth laboratory out of India. And that is an important aspect, because I think India is a big growth laboratory for the future.
Okay, so a big growth lab for the future, that would be your sales pitch. Sumanto, quickly, what would the best sales pitch out of India be?
So I agree with what both the other speakers have been saying, and I think that I think that the comparison always is with China, and the fact that we're a democracy and a rule of law, we have a great rule of law, etc. These are the things which keep the faith of the world community in us. But I think apart from the fact that we are a massive market with a massive young population, which is to our in our favor, the one other thing is I just think it's the Indian, this what we call the jugaad innovation mindset, which is really something that can still, I mean, we sent a Mars mission successfully at 1/10 the cost of what the US did. And so it's not just about being cheap, but it's about being frugal and flexible and coming up with jugaad innovative solutions to solve the world's problems. And that's what I would invite the world to come to us for.
Okay, so not just the world's back room and not just the world's back office, but also the world's problem solver is the big message coming in. India continues to be in the top 10. We've slipped 2 notches, but we must aim to be in the top 5. Our experts out there have pointed out what do we need to do to get to the top 5 rank. But on that note, completely out of time on this edition of the India Development Debate, Sadanand Dume, Harish Bijur and Sumanto, thanks very, very much for being with us in this edition of this show. We'll take a quick breather and be back next with Top 10 at 10.